Welcome to the first edition of the Cohda Wireless podcast. I'm joined by Paul Gray, Chief Executive. Hi, Paul.
Afternoon.
And of course, Andrea Ash, who's Vice President of Marketing. And we're going to talk about the MK6. We've obviously had a very exciting announcement recently on the launch of the MK6. But before I get into that, Paul, can you just talk about your current role and your background with Cohda Wireless?
Certainly. Well, I'm CEO today, but I've been with Cohda for quite a long time. So I joined back in 2006. Now, Cohda was founded in 2004, but I actually did my PhD with the founders way back in the mid 90s. And once they got the company up and running, they were looking for a chief engineer, and approached me and looked like a really good gig. So I joined and did that for about 5 years before moving on to become CEO.
And then what about you, Andrea?
Yes, so I've actually just recognised 5 years at Cohda Wireless, moving back to Adelaide and joining an organisation with an international market was very attractive, and obviously with a core vision of helping people on the roadways. I was very excited to be able to join such a company, and been here head of marketing for 5 years.
Great stuff. So Paul, Cohda Wireless is a market leader in V2X connectivity. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Obviously, there's a lot of people know who Cohda is, but for those who are new to Cohda and what it does, what gets everyone at Cohda out of bed in the morning? What's the mission?
Okay, certainly. So V2X is all about vehicle to everything communications, particularly for automotive, and the X is a placeholder for things like vehicle to vehicle communications, vehicle to infrastructure communications, even vehicle to pedestrian communications, and it's all about connecting those things in the roadway with the threefold goals of improving safety, reducing congestion, and lowering the environmental impact of our transportation systems. And that's really what Cohda's mission is all about, to really make our roads safer, more enjoyable, with less environmental impact.
And so you develop software that manages these kind of applications, but there's also hardware as well. And the MK6 is obviously the most recent example. So tell us a little about the MK6 and where does it fit in terms of Cohda's mission? Okay,
so you're right. We make software that goes into production vehicles. So we have V2X software that's currently in the VW Golf 8, which is in production in Europe. But we're also focused on areas like smart cities and smart mines. So improving, your safety in mines, but also adding that connectivity to the smart cities. And that involves putting hardware into intersections and to allow those vehicles to communicate with the traffic lights and then subsequently back into the traffic management system. So it's all about having those vehicles more tightly integrated to improve traffic flow. And so we also build the hardware that goes onto the streets as well.
So there's one version of the MK6 that goes into a vehicle, whether it's a car or a mining truck, and then the other one goes onto roadside infrastructure, and those two speak to each other.
Exactly, and inside they're essentially the same. It's a very similar hardware. They're just really different enclosures. So the one that goes in the vehicle is a lightweight enclosure, but obviously the one that goes goes on the traffic light has to be weatherproof, and so on, has to be out in the weather. And the ones that go into mining vehicles need to be as tough as nails. So.
Oh, sure. So the MK6 has been described as the most versatile and most advanced V2X connectivity solution. Why is that?
It's really a big step for Cohda. So the MK6, not surprisingly from the name, is our sixth generation product. We have products going back MK1, MK2, MK3, and so on. All of those earlier products were single radio products that really just focused on quite a narrow set of functionality. But the MK6 is our first multi-radio product. So not only can it do two different versions of V2X to address global markets, but it also can do 5G connectivity, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, everything like that. So it really is a very versatile, very richly featured product.
So Andrew, the MK6 was launched fairly recently. What sort of response did Cohda get from the market?
I would actually say the market's been waiting for it. So Cohda with our MK5 had a lot of use and experience from the marketplace. Knowing some of the regions were actually changing out the technology they were using. As Paul said, the MK5 was a single radio with DSRC. We've got the markets of the US and China and also Europe kind of looking to see their direction of using CV2X. So as I said, the market was waiting for it. Great initial reaction, great media coverage, actually kind of spreading the word. But we're now getting units out there where everyone's wanting to test it as well.
And where are we, Paul, in terms of the rollout of a smart and connected transport system? Obviously, it's a massive logistical exercise. You've got, technology that's going to go into vehicles, and then all of your transport departments and your decision makers then have to purchase and adapt their streets with that technology. Where are things at? There's a lot of trials going on. Are we still at that sort of phase?
We're really reached the point now, a tipping point essentially. So V2X as a technology has been out and about for 15 years now, where standards have been developed and refined. Lots of trials have happened globally, even here in Australia. There've been big, quite significant trials up in Queensland, for example. Those trials were important to understand the technology and to see what they can do with it. But we're starting to move away from the trials into the deployment. So, as I mentioned, VW has got production vehicles on the roads in Europe. The GM has had production vehicles. We're seeing a lot of concrete plans from global car makers to be in production with the technology in vehicles by sort of the 2024 to 2026 timeframe. Just recently, the European NCAP, which is takes care of 5-star crash ratings and the likes, have announced that V2X needs to be in production vehicles to achieve a 5-star crash rating by 2026, and so that's really getting the automotive market moving, and then we're also seeing a lot of traction now happening in the from departments of transports and road operators. So big initiatives in Europe called the C Roads project, which is getting big deployments of thousands of roadside units out on motorways and cities in Europe. And then in the US, we're seeing the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, is starting to fund a lot of these deployments and big projects at the sort of State Department of Transport level in the US.
So tipping point does seem very clear. And I think, Andrea, it's worth emphasizing the difference between, I guess there's the layman's perception of autonomous vehicles, for example, is that they have either radar or LiDAR that essentially feels its way around in the dark, but it doesn't bump into things, almost like the way that a bat uses sonar. Mm-hmm. But Cohda's technology involves vehicles being connected to other vehicles and to roadside infrastructure, so that it almost gives you, you can see in front, if you're driving along a road and there's a bus in front of you, the bus sees that there's a cyclist, for example, in front of the bus, and you as the driver behind the bus then are alerted to that danger, something that radar or LiDAR can't really do. So would you describe that as the difference?
Yeah, I think if I can kind of answer that in a couple of sections. First is identifying connected vehicles as a step towards autonomous vehicles. So I think people recognise self-driving vehicles and understand that's part of the future, but it is part of the future, and we've got this really important step before that, and that is with connected vehicles. So as Paul mentioned, VW already has V2X technology in there. A lot of the OEMs right now are looking also to include it in their next production platforms, and this is actually connecting the vehicles to be able to talk to the vehicles, talk to infrastructure, and it's non-line of sight information. And then when you're thinking about the sharing of information, as you say, when you've got connected vehicles talking to each other, they can also share that information. And, we talk about it, about cooperative perception messaging. So it gives them a broader vision for what a car today can actually see using, the important sensors of radars and LiDARs, but this is another level of information.
And I think for governments, would I be right in saying, Paul, this is a good news story in terms of investment? This is about saving people's lives. Ultimately, it's obviously not a panacea, but it's going to save a lot of road accidents, which typically occur through human inattention, you're going to be alerted to things that the human might not be focusing on. Is that correct?
Exactly. The US Department of Transport has done a lot of analysis and the likes, and they predict that this vehicle-to-vehicle technology alone can play a role in something like over 80% of traffic accidents. So, it really is just, increasing awareness, giving the driver, a better situation awareness of things that are around them and what they need to react to, and really drawing their attention to any danger that may be there. They 99 times out of 100 or 999 times out of 1,000, the driver can see those, but it's those corner cases, where even the most attentive driver isn't going to see the danger, and it can really aid them and give them an early alert so they can take steps to avoid an accident.
So if you're a mid-sized city in Australia, or it could be Spain, Lithuania, wherever, that's looking to get on board with this and do trials, how do they approach Cohda Wireless, and how do you support them in getting a trial up and running?
Well, the vast majority of cases, it's we're just responding to public RFQs. So that a city or a department of transport will say, yeah, we will decide they want to be trialing this technology, and they come up with plans and likes, and then they release a request for quotations, and Cohda would respond to them, and in many cases win them.
And I guess the more you respond to, the more there will be, because people, cities to an extent compete with one another, and of course there'll come a point where everyone will have to do this, whether they want to or not.
Yeah, I'd say if you're looking at Department of Transports or cities, they're all looking at, the majority of them are looking at what their future strategy is for connected infrastructure. And we find, a number of them have participants in the intelligent transport system industry platforms. So we have one in Australia, there's ITS America, there's Ertico in Europe. So the cities are participating because they do want to make their roads safer.
And there seems to be two schools of thought in terms of how this will roll out, either V2X using DSRC or radio communication, or CV2X, which is cellular vehicle technology. But Cohda's MK6 is agnostic. It's irrelevant. You can accommodate both, whichever way things pan out.
Exactly. And that was the big change from the MK5 to the MK6. MK5, as Andrea said, the MK5 only supported DSRC, but now the MK6 supports both. So it's really agnostic to that, which means, you especially in those regions where it's still up in the air and they're not sure which direction it's going to move, well, departments of transport can deploy the technology now, or the equipment now, with peace of mind, because they know it can just be reconfigured depending on which way things pan out.
So it provides confidence for future proofing. So depending on the technology they're using, they've got the flexibility. The MK6 contains the range of technology that is required, but also it has the latest chipsets, both from NXP with the SAF 5400 and also from Qualcomm with their
SA515?
SA515, thank you.
Is that the Snapdragon one?
Yes. And that supports the 3GPP Release 15. So even in the countries where the technology is defined, we have the latest chipsets to support that technology.
And that's, the very latest chipset. And so other functionality of the MK6, Paul, I know it's got Bluetooth and all sorts of aerials and antennas. Take us a little bit through that.
Well, exactly. So as we said, there's dual DSRC radios in there. There's the CV2X radio in there, which is then coupled with also a 5G cellular backhaul. So that gives them a lot of bandwidth and the likes to be able to communicating with these devices. Then Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and they're kind of just the radio interfaces, but then there's also Ethernet and CAN bus and USB and SD cards and everything like that. So it really is a flexible rich device which can really lend itself to multiple visions of how this thing should be, how this technology should be deployed.
And you've got a big team both here in Australia as well as in the US and other places, Germany, for example. So you can provide a lot of support and a lot of advice, can't you?
Yeah, certainly. So today, Cohda is about 55 people. we're headquartered here in Adelaide in South Australia, where majority of the engineering development and and administration and marketing happens, and then we've got about 35 people here, or 40 people here in Adelaide. Where all that, of those, about 35 of those are engineers, and then we also got sales offices in Munich and in Indiana. So we, got that sort of global reach, to really, be engaging with our customers overseas and making sure they have the support they need.
Great. So, Andrea, finally, how do interested customers get a hold of Cohda?
Yes, well, if cohdawireless.com, always a great place to start, COHDA, wireless.com. Also, email us directly. So that's inquiries at cohdawireless.com.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks very much for your time. It's been very interesting learning about the MK6, and wish Cohda the best of luck in terms of getting that technology out there and expediting this transition. Because every day out there, I guess, is lives that could be saved, and there's a green benefit to it as well. So, look forward to seeing how things go.
Perfect. Thank you, Grant.
Thanks, Grant.